as a practice is mindfulness simply of that experience of selflessness. And Joseph and I will talk about how I view the difference between those two paths of practice and the significance or lack thereof of that difference. But these are the terms you want to understand, and I spell this out more clearly in my book, Waking Up, if any of this gets too confusing. Well, let's start with my experience of doing Vipassana, because as you know, I spent several years and at least 1 year on retreat practicing this Burmese style of Vipassana in a very pure way. Without we hadn't discovered Dzogchen teaching yet, and I didn't really have another model of how to practice. As many people do in the practice of mindfulness, I started, as virtually everyone does, with the possible exception of yourself, I started with a very clear sense of being a self, being a subject who is now adopting this practice for reasons of both intellectual interest and wanting to overcome the kinds of suffering that all selves are prone to. So I felt like I was the subject of my experience, and now I'm given this practice, which, as you gave us about an hour ago, starts with just strategically paying attention to all of one's sensory experience. So you start with the breath and then sensations in the body, and the goal is to pay attention clearly enough so as to have certain kinds of insights. The one most interesting insight that is advertised is to discover that the self is an illusion, that you don't have this self that you thought you had, and with that comes a kind of relief from all the problems selves are heir to. But the issue is that you can seem to practice mindfulness as a strategy, as a self, paying strategic attention to experience, and in many cases go for weeks and months and years only in a very haphazard way experiencing this loss of self. Frankly, it seems to me that can happen even if one has had this, or seems to have had this zero experience, where you've gone all the way through the progress of insight, the lights go out, you come back, you no longer have a view of self, say, you no longer have a belief in self, but one's mindfulness thereafter is not necessarily synonymous with feeling free of self. With the Dzogchen teaching, it begins with not a practice, it begins with this insight into the selflessness of consciousness, and unless you can have that insight, you actually can't do the practice. There's not something to pay attention to apart from the selflessness of consciousness. And once you've had that insight, then every moment of practice is synonymous with selflessness. So my question to you is the mindfulness that most people experience, this dualistic mindfulness, the strategy of paying attention, not actually mindfulness? Is it just a way of orienting to the true mindfulness that will arise when you can actually see that in the act of seeing, there's just pure seeing, there's no seer and things seen? So yeah, that's the question. Is what most people most of the time call mindfulness not actually the real thing, just a way of getting people to hopefully discover the real thing?
Okay, this question just opens up a whole big discussion of various things. So first, to say that in the beginning of practice, whether it's Dzogchen or Vipassana, even though we use those two terms, Dzogchen and Vipassana, to describe the general orientation of practice, just as you pointed out with Dzogchen, but it's also true of Vipassana, for most people, the beginning practices are not actually doing Dzogchen or Vipassana. It's kind of either approximating Dzogchen, approximating some recognition of the nature of mind, the selfless nature, but people have not necessarily actually experienced it, but they're in the vicinity. Mm-hmm. And so the practice is one of just again and again trying to come to it, and at a certain moment people have that actual realization. As you say, that's when Dzogchen really begins. In Vipassana, the beginning stages really are not Vipassana. Even though that's the term we use for it, the beginning stages really are the development. It's basically a samatha, a concentration practice. It's using mindfulness to just connect and be present moment after moment, to build up a certain level of concentration. Vipassana starts happening, real Vipassana starts happening when there's enough momentum of both mindfulness and concentration, so that first the practice starts happening by itself, and so there's not the sense of someone making an effort to do it. It's rolling along by itself, and the understanding in that rolling along by itself mode, the impermanence of things arising and passing is very clear.
Right.
So that's really the beginning of Vipassana. So that's just a little background to the beginning stages of both practices.
Right, except that description of the beginning, to my ear, articulates a difference between the two paths that it's hard to reconcile. I mean,
Okay. I'll be getting to that. Okay. I just wanted to point out that the terms we use to describe the practice of Vipassana and Dzogchen, in both cases, have a preliminary...
except in the case of Dzogchen, there's no confusion about when the practice starts. So, for instance, if you're agreeing with me about, or if you're suggesting that the true mindfulness only starts when...
Not true mindfulness, true Vipassana.
So mindfulness is the technique. Vipassana is the insight born of the technique.
Yes.
What we have is a culture of meditators now. I mean, mindfulness is incredibly well subscribed as a method of meditation. Many people think they're practicing mindfulness / Vipassana.
No, but
in the way that it is there to be
but
practiced.
that's equating those two terms.
Which is commonly
done. It is common, but that's an inaccurate and perhaps popular understanding, and that's why I'm making the point that you can be practicing mindfulness, and it's only at a certain stage of that it becomes Vipassana.
Yes.
Even though we use the term Vipassana.
Okay, but this gets to the heart of my question. So you're someone who has practiced mindfulness to the point of Vipassana. So you're playing the real game.
Right.
My question about the character of one's mindfulness at that point is...
No, I want to get to that. I just wanted to set that framework of understanding the terminology.
Okay.
So at the point where mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness actually becomes Vipassana practice, an insight practice, there is a very important stage of insight, which very interestingly, the term is similar to a Dzogchen term. And for myself, it's been an interesting exploration. Is it in some way related? Are the two experiences related or not? But in Vipassana, the stage of insight is called purification of view. And in Dzogchen, as you know, they talk a lot about the view and clarifying the view. So in the Vipassana, in this particular stage of insight, purification of view, there is enough momentum of mindfulness and concentration so that the whole process is running along by itself.
Right.
And there's the clear seeing, the clear understanding that in every moment, all that's happening is a pairwise progression of knowing an object. And that's all. There's knowing of a sight, a sound, a smell, and that it's seen very clearly that the knowing that's arising in this pairwise progression is also conditioned and impermanent.
Right.
And so there is a profound and still beginning understanding of the selfless nature of knowing, of consciousness.
Right.
And so from that, and this is not a moment, this is, at this stage,
it's a flow.
It's
of
a
that.
flow of
Yes.
that experience, and it.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's familiar to me from my Vipassana practice. The difference, however, is that you're still talking about a way of seeing that is contingent upon momentum. It's contingent upon having built up the energy of practice on retreat, so that you've got enough concentration and you can really just.
Yes.
It's effortless, as you say,
Yeah.
and you are then, in some sense, being pushed from behind by all of the work you've
Yes.
recently
Yes.
put in. What's different about the insight into selflessness born of Dzogchen practice, or which is synonymous with Dzogchen practice, is that it's not contingent upon any of that.
No.
You need no momentum. It's morning here. We just got up. I haven't had enough coffee. I've got no momentum. We're just talking. But the thing that is synonymous with the insight
Yes.
that is Dzogchen practice is available in this instant.
Yes. Except.
And so
Right.
my question to you is that really what mindfulness is
Right.
in your view of Vipassana?
Yes.
I'm going to tie you down to something.
No. This whole conversation touches on a lot of interesting questions and points. So, even though the way you describe, and I've had the same experience in the Dzogchen practice, that it's not dependent on momentum, but from my perspective, at least at the moment, the emphasis in Dzogchen is stabilizing the recognition.
Yes.
To me, I think that stabilization is really another word for momentum.
Right.
You know,
I would agree with you there. I think that's the way you would stabilize it is to have momentum.
Yes.
So whether they're truly synonymous or momentum,
Yes.
I mean, you need concentration and you need a continuity
Yes.
of mindfulness.
Yeah.
But the crucial difference from my point of view is it seems having practiced both and having had experiences of Vipassana momentum and Vipassana effortlessness on retreat, I came away from that experience, and as I think many, if not most Vipassana yogis do, feeling that absolutely clear insight into selflessness is contingent upon all of that machinery of effort and momentum that one can only have on retreat. So unless you've had enough concentration over the course of a day and have been meditating for hours and hours, there's not a hell of a lot to notice in your workaday mindfulness that is truly profound or truly synonymous with the mind of enlightenment.
well, I just have some questions about that from two sides. From the Dzogchen side, even though the recognition is available in any moment, without the stability, which comes from a momentum,
right.
my experience, both in doing the practice and in observing people, is that likewise, the moments of recognition are quite few and far between because of the habit of mind
Right.
of being distracted.
Yeah.
And so, even though it's always available in the moment, in fact, to manifest that understanding takes momentum. Also, it takes the build-up.
Well, it depends on what you mean by manifest, because if you mean manifest the outward signs of a totally transformed personality that is attractive to others.
No,
Okay,
that's not what I mean.
So then the question is, what counts as a breakthrough into the wisdom of emptiness or the wisdom of selflessness that makes a difference to the person? I mean, what is?
I would say how often. So, from the Dzogchen perspective, how often one is recognizing it.
Yes, But let's say in both cases it's mindfulness. In both cases it's noticing you've been lost in thought,